Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, the founder and president of the Pixel Project, and I'm moderating the 7th YouTube session of the 7th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. So through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 12 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. So we'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project and violence against women by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session. I'm going to put him on screen. And it's the acclaimed fantasy and young adult author, Maurice Broaddus. Now, Maurice is a community organizer and teacher whose work has appeared in magazines like Lightspeed Magazine, Weird Tales, Beneath the Skies, Asimov's, Cemetery Dance, Uncanny Magazine, with some of his stories having been collected in The Voice of Martyrs. His books include The Knights of Breton Court, Buffalo Soldier, Pimp My Airship, and The Usual Suspects. And so Maurice has also generously donated a couple of awesome goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page, including, and the first one is a Maurice Broaddus Starter Book Bundle, which is for US donors only. So Maurice has the books here to show you, and they'll all be signed and personalized. So there's one copy of Buffalo Soldier, which is in paperback, and one copy of Pimp My Airship, which is also in paperback, and one copy of The Usual Suspects, which is hardcover. And Maurice will tuck in some surprise swag when he sends the books to you. And there'll be there's the second goodie as well, and it's Maurice critiquing your work in progress, and this is for donors worldwide. So there's one of this, and he's offering a chance for one donor to get a written critique from him via email. So this opportunity includes one written critique on 5,000 words for your work in progress. These can come from a novel, a novelette, a novella, or a short story. And he'll also do one round of up to 3 follow-up questions via email after he has sent you your critique. So after you've read the critique from Maurice, if you need to ask him any questions for clarification's sake, or you have another question to ask, that's your chance. And Maurice has a very packed schedule between his writing, teaching, and community organizing work. So there is just one of this opportunity available, which would be perfect for any science fiction and fantasy authors serious about honing their craft. And we have raised $1,090 towards our 5,000 goal so far, and that's pretty slow going. But given that this year is 2020 and there's COVID-19 everywhere, it's to be expected. But we hope that you would contribute a little bit to our slow rising fundraiser. So please give generously before the fundraiser ends on the 18th of October. And all funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. This includes daily, what we call our daily helpline sessions on Twitter between 8 p.m. Eastern Time to midnight Eastern Time, where we tweet out helplines from over 30 countries worldwide. It also includes programs such as this one, Read for Pixels, where we create and archive resources for people worldwide, including parents, teachers, kids, fandoms, pet lovers, everyone. So if you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you'll also be able to ask Maurice questions live. Just make sure you're logged onto your YouTube account so you can type questions into the screen, and Juliana, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Maurice to answer. And now over to Maurice. Welcome to Read for Pixels, Maurice. What will you be reading for us today?
So I will be reading, for a start, thank you for having me. And I'll be reading a selection from my story, The Ache of Home, which was published in Uncanny Magazine. So, The Ache of Home. The Indy Metro bus came to a shuddering halt and deposited Celeste Burrows at her stop. A plastic shelter enclosed a bench printed with the words, "Embrace Mortality." Celeste looped the cord of her earbuds around her thumb and then unwound it, careful not to pull the cord free from her pocket where it trailed, not plugged in to any device. Listening to music in public violated her sense of personal boundaries. The inserted earbuds were her shield against the catcalls and unwanted attempts at conversation, both on the bus and on her walk home. The bus stop was right across from a construction site of a new park. She jumped at the shrill drone of a drill and the metallic clatter of pieces falling to the ground. She feared the men suspected she could hear just fine. Cordoned off behind a fence, not wanting the intrusion of the neighborhood, hardscrabble men, sun-baked red and wearing fluorescent green t-shirts and hard hats, eyed her like prairie dogs catching a scent. Politicians decided that they needed to pour $5 million into constructing a dog park and skate park, though no one she knew in the neighborhood demanded either. She reminded herself that such amenities weren't for them. They were for the future residents once the city pushed the current ones out. Despite dressing in a smart, though unflattering, business suit which covered her from neck to knee, despite the earbuds being in plain sight, despite both a purse and a bag slung over an obviously exhausted body, the men mistook her stride for interest, and the braying started. Celeste shrugged her purse higher on her shoulder and walked briskly. Feeling the call of the green space, as she called it, Celeste slowed down. Her mind reached out along what she thought of as the lifelines. If she tried hard enough, was quiet enough, she could hear the whispers of the plants. Celeste stepped across the cracked sidewalks and scree of rocks and broken glass as weeds overgrew the asphalt along the concrete desert, longing for the familiar green of her neighborhood. The 38th Street corridor reeked of exhaust from the buzz of traffic. People drove along her neighborhood on their way to and from their downtown jobs. She worked as a receptionist and de facto office manager at a computer consulting company, but that was not what anyone saw. A car stopped at a light as she neared the intersection. Fearing she might jump in or something, the white driver locked their doors, twice for good measure. She sighed. A drone flew overhead. It passed along Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard and, as if thinking better of it, flew off in another direction. The joke was that if someone found themselves lost in any city on a street named Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard, they should run. Celeste smirked at the thought. They were the ones who were lost. She passed Crown Hill Cemetery, repository of the found, and crossed Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard into her neighborhood. She walked from their world into hers. On the final blocks on the walk home, Celeste allowed her mind to drift to thoughts of what to make for dinner. She dropped her bag by the door, but carried her purse all the way to her kitchen counter. She opened and shut her cabinet doors like she browsed through the pages of a catalog, not satisfied by anything she pictured. Her stomach grumbled. She hated feeling hungry. Hunger had the ache of home. It brought back memories of growing up on government cheese and peanut butter sandwiches, of powerlessness, of worry where the next meal might come from, of her parents having to choose between buying food and paying a utility bill. Many a night she rifled through her snack drawer just to stave off the feeling. She knew she gained a few unnecessary pounds, but peace of mind was worth it. Someone banged at the front door. Celeste scooted her bag to the side and opened it. Jamal Keaty, called Ghost by his people, half smiled at her. Tattoos etched his shirtless torso. He accumulated quite the collection from his stint in prison. A set of dice, a marijuana leaf, a naked woman on his left shoulder, 2 gun handles at his waistband as if tucked into his pants, a cross along his scapula, tears under his right eye, phrases like prodigal son, 4th ward, Miss Sheila, dying, died to live. The story of his life written in the in-between places. Hey, can I holler at you for a minute? Ghost asked. It was the first time Ghost hollered at her, and she made the mistake of not only taking out her earbuds, but offering up her name. He told her that her name reminded him of his favorite porn star. That creeped her out enough to not only end the conversation, but give him the earbud treatment for the next few months. He began to spot him around the neighborhood, though. He volunteered at Miss Sheila's after-school snack program. Miss Sheila was the neighborhood seamstress who made healing pillows and raised many of the kids like they were her own. He walked the kids to and from their bus stops like a protective pit bull, and he apologized to her on more than one occasion for his disrespect. When she asked him why he did so much around the neighborhood, he told her, "When I was growing up, I saw things that were wrong, but didn't know what I could do about it. I can't do much, but I can use what I have to make a difference where I can." Ever since, every now and then, she removed her earbuds for him. I was about to fix something for dinner. Celeste leaned against her door, blocking the view into her home. "Yeah, I could eat." Ghost lowered his eyes to study the welcome mat in front of her door. "Yeah, I bet you could." Celeste held the door open for him. Ghost brushed past her. "Damn, Ghost, you stink." "Yeah, I smell natural. Yeah, I don't hide who I am. I don't cover my essence." "Yeah, at least cover your funk. Damn." Ghost took a seat at her dining room table. Like many of the men in the neighborhood, he was still on papers, needing to report to a probation officer. Until he was off papers, he complained that he existed in limbo. He reached for his tattoo of dice. The inked image stretched against his skin as if drawn up by a magnet until they pulled free. He rolled the dice along the table in the same way one might absently drum their fingers. Used to his brand of magic, Celeste hated to consider what he did with the tattoo of the naked woman. The man is walking the streets. Ghost's voice lowered, not quite afraid, not quite reverential, his voice thick with warning. "What man?" Celeste propped her refrigerator door open while she sniffed the contents of different Ziploc containers. She hated the idea of waste, though none of the leftovers appealed to her. They would be new for Ghost, though. Playing hostess, being able to share, renewed her appetite. No, one of them college professor types, or one of the city inspectors, I can't tell. He's got a clipboard, though. What does he want? Celeste adjusted to this kind of attention. All manner of academics wanted to study their neighborhood. Politicians, government officials, nonprofits, charities, corporations, all talked about the poor without actually knowing any. Studies were as close as they came, reducing the stories of her and her neighbors to empty statistics and figures, an assembly of numbers without context. Ghost shifted in his seats, not finding any position comfortable. "Don't know, but when the man walks the street, I get..." "Ghost?" Celeste said louder than she wanted over the groaning hum of the microwave. Careful to avoid her eyes, Ghost rolled the dice again. Not liking the results, he scooped them up and re-rolled. "Yeah, something like that." "So why tell me?" Celeste set out dishes and silverware carefully arranged along a napkin. She plated the food, and only when she was satisfied with the arrangement did she sit down. Ghost shuffled vegetables into his mouth. He chewed noisily, speaking between bites. "These are good. You do something special to them?" "That's not the way it works. I can do more than flavor some vegetables." Celeste shifted, uncomfortable with the topic of her magic. It felt too personal. "Look, don't try to distract me. Why tell me?" "What if they know?" Ghost said with a conspiratorial whisper. "Know what?" "About you and me fighting against that store." "It's not exactly a state secret. The last thing we need is some overpriced grocery store coming into the neighborhood." The city planned to demolish several storefronts in the neighborhood to make way for one of those high-end food markets. Anyway, when did we start worrying about that? When the man started walking the streets. Ghost lowered his voice and pointed his fork toward the window. Someone banged at the front door. Celeste and Ghost glanced at one another and then back at the door. It wasn't the belligerent kind of knocking which signaled the police were about to burst in. It also wasn't the steady, anxious knock of a neighbor either. Celeste walked to the door. Ghost stood, edging toward a shadowed corner of the room. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Where you go, I go," Ghost said. His hands danced along his belly towards the handles of his tattooed guns. Her hands rested on the doorknob. Celeste nodded to Ghost. He returned a single, grim uptick of his chin, and she opened the door. I think I'll stop there.
Oh, I accidentally muted myself. So that was great. And what I liked about the story when I first read it is that you actually captured what many women feel when they're navigating public spaces, and you kind of figure out, should I walk down that street because I'm gonna get catcalled, and I might lose my temper and take something and hurl it at them.
Right.
It's true though. Yeah, or it's way too dangerous to walk there, but that sort of navigation of public spaces is something that women and girls do a lot. And surprisingly, even during the pandemic, with the lockdown, you might think that street harassment has gone down.
Yeah.
It hasn't. It's gotten worse in intensity whenever, lockdowns are eased. So, anyway, so onwards to today's discussion. So your books and stories include compelling female characters who are complex, independent-minded, flawed, and very human. For example, Kate Syringa and Kajika in Buffalo Soldier, and Sophie Jefferson in Pimp My Airship. So who or what are your inspirations for your female characters?
Honestly, I have a lot of female friends. So it's I have a lot of female friends. I have a wife. I have several sisters. And so I have a very strong-willed mother. I'm surrounded by female voices, and I have the common sense to listen to all of them.
So their voices sort of come out in your characters.
Yeah, and so Kajika, for example, in Buffalo Soldier, I have a friend who's a Native American, and she is, we're just really close friends. We're actually both Magic the Gathering nerds, and so that's actually the basis of part of our friendship. But she's sort of like a sister to me, and so when I was coming up with this character, I wanted someone to, I'm just basically inspired by her when it came to creating Kajika, for example.
Yeah, great. So expanding from that, all genres, including fantasy, have their share of female stereotypes and sexist and misogynist tropes. And what's notable about your books and stories is that many of your female characters are in a position of power, some kind of power. So Kate is a preternaturally talented fighter and tracker. Kajika is a major decision maker of a nation, and Sophie is an heiress who is galvanized into action after her father's murder, which is kind of the reverse of bridging. Because bridging, you have the murder or the rape of a woman that galvanizes, that catalyzes the male character's journey, but this is the reverse.
Right.
So how do you break stereotypes and subvert tropes to create empowered female characters with agency when they're dealing with the world around them, including sexism, misogyny, and violence against women?
Well, sometimes it's just a matter of careful research and paying attention to the stories that have already been. So with Kate Syringa, for example, I'd been doing a lot of research about the history of the Pinkertons, because in Buffalo Soldier and Pimp My Airship, the Pinkertons are the federalized police force. And so I was doing a lot of research on the history of the Pinkertons, and one of the early Pinkertons was this amazing woman who, few people had heard of. And so I read her story. I loved her story, and I incorporated and let her be part of the inspiration for the Kate character. And so I think that's pretty much been the pattern of how I do a lot of my work. Part of it's based on research, and part of it is just a matter of moving with great intentionality about subverting tropes. So because the tropes are fine, they're fine for some. I find them boring. I find them lazy, and I don't want that to be a hallmark of any of my work. So it's like, well, what are the things that I haven't seen? That's what I'm trying to write, or who are the characters I haven't encountered? I want to populate my work with those sort of characters and those sort of stories.
Yeah, and it's amazing to find out from what you're saying that there was a woman who was a Pinkerton, because if most people think that Pinkertons were just men.
No, exactly. And then when I stumbled across her story, I was just like, this woman's amazing. And so I wanted to draw on that. But you find that story repeated all over the place. There was a time when I was writing. I switched genres fairly often, and so I was going through my Western phase for a while, and then I found all these stories about Black women cowboys, and I was just like, why don't we ever hear these stories? And so I had them front and centered, featured in my stories. So like I said, it's just matter. I love uncovered history. I love hidden histories. I love stories that we haven't been told. When my mother's Jamaican, and so I was raised hearing all sorts of stories growing up. But to hear the figures of many of the Maroons, like Nanny, and how she was a major leader of the Maroons in Jamaica, that forms part of the backdrop for the universe in Pimp My Airship, also in Pimp My Airship and Buffalo Soldier. So, like I said, it's just something I love doing as part of my work.
Oh, yeah. It's, Mary Robinette Cowell talked about this, that a lot of people often think of history as like a monolith, but actually there are a lot of people's voices who are just buried, including women. And we're only just starting to hear about them now when, we have Google and things like that, and we can all go digging for those stories. And hopefully we'll see more and more of them emerge, because they're often more interesting than histories that we've been fed in school, the histories that are common knowledge, for example.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's interesting because history was actually my worst subject in school. And I think part of that was because when I was coming up, I mean, the way history was taught, it was just about names and dates. And I have very little capacity for names and dates. Now, if someone had told me, hey, history is just a collection of stories, well, hey, stories is what I do. Stories is what I love. And so coming at history that way, would have had me engaged. And so now I feel like I'm indulging this love of history that I never knew I had, because I'm looking at it just as, these stories I get to discover and read about.
So my best history teacher was actually a master storyteller. She did not make us memorize dates unless it was like a major date, like 1824, the Anglo-Dutch Treaty, and spice, the spice channels. But she would tell us about who had affairs with who, and so which enraged husband went after someone else, and so that impacted the treaty and stuff like that. And I remember thinking, wow, I wish more teachers were like this.
Right, exactly.
Because if we know the human stories, including stories of women who are often hidden, tucked away in history, if we knew all these really interesting stories, then I think most kids won't have trouble remembering dates. They won't have trouble remembering what happened and consequences of what happened. So let's talk about that cringe-inducing hashtag, men writing women, where male authors can't seem to write female characters well. And even huge best-selling male authors such as Brandon Sanderson have talked about how they initially found it difficult to write women well. And it took a lot of work before they could finally break out of stereotypes and write female characters. So just now you were talking about how you are surrounded by women. You have sisters, you have a strong mom, you have a wife, you have many female friends. But when you first started writing stories, was it just natural to you to just write about, improve women in your stories, or did you also find it difficult to get out of stereotypes? Because we're writing a genre, right, for science fiction and fantasy, so the tropes are always there, the back of the mind. So do you find it difficult?
Yeah, I'm thinking back because I've been my first story was published in 1999. So I'm thinking back over my early career, and I'm just like, ooh, I don't know if I want to think too hard about how I was writing women 20 years ago. Heck, I don't think I want to think too hard about how I was writing women 10 years ago, now that I think about it. But I mean, that's literally our job, though. Our job is to investigate characters and write fully fleshed out characters. And I know that I started off, I think most of my stories, I'm trying to think back on my early stories, most of them centered around men, as I was grappling with this whole idea of what it means to write, period. Yeah, sorry for the pause. I'm literally thinking through my stories as they were published, and how long it took me before I started incorporating writing women characters. And I think luckily once I did start incorporating women characters, I think even early on, one of my big fears was just getting the characters wrong. I've always approached writing, all writing as me writing the other, because unless I'm writing about an insecure, nerdy black guy, all of my writing is writing the other, and so I'm always really concerned about getting those the other characters right. And I think that concern has been a hallmark from me early on. And so once I did start writing women characters, because my first love has always been short stories, and so in fact, which was great because short stories became my lab for how to tell stories, how to improve on different aspects of my storytelling. So, in these short spaces, I could perfect, voice and characterization and things like that. And so, actually, I'm beginning to wonder if it wasn't with me writing the Black women cowboy stories that I was writing that I started to incorporate more female voices in my stories, and then learning what it means to write women characters now. And then frankly, what it means to get them right, which like in the case of Buffalo Soldier, handing my story off to women to say, hey, what do you think? And then not being afraid to go, hey, act like you've met a woman before. So, so there was that whole growing process, which, like I said, that's the job though. The job is to get characters right. The job is to reflect people's stories. The job is to create fully rounded characters. So I want to be corrected and I want to get it right.
So why do you think many authors, especially male authors, still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men?
Yeah, that's, I wonder how much of it is just strictly a pride thing. Because like I said, I have no compunction at all about handing my work off to be critiqued. And I don't start from a place of, I know what I'm doing. I know I nailed this. I got this. I don't start from that place. I start from a place of, no, I don't know I don't know what I don't know. So let me go to the experts. And so I was, back then, I don't think the term sensitivity reader was a thing, but that was my thing. Is like, hey, this is what I've written. Where have I come short on my writing? And so I'm wondering if for a lot of folks, they just don't go through that process, that attentiveness when it comes to their own writing. They figure they know the story. I know the story I want to tell, and then you get locked into that, and you tell that story in your way, on your terms, regardless of that care of characters.
Yeah, but isn't it? Well, this might be a Captain Obvious thing, but just a rhetorical thing. Isn't it better to write stories where you get it right rather than being tone deaf and getting it wrong, and then people start piling on you because you're portraying them wrong?
Right.
So,
well, you would think that'd be an obvious thing, but as I've read a lot of genre work and read how they get women wrong, or read how they get Black people wrong, and I think a big part of that is a lot of folks are in their own little echo chambers. And so I distinctly remember coming up in the horror circles, fairly disgusted about how Black people were portrayed, for example. But to them, it was fine because that was, these stereotypes that they had in their head, who were they showing their work to? Other people who had the same stereotypes in their head. So as far as they were concerned, they were getting it right. And as opposed to actually saying, hey, I wonder if a Black person would read this the same way we are. But I mean, if people are siloed in their echo chambers, you get what we get. I mean, you get what we see. So.
So moving on from that, some of your female characters may be perceived by readers as quote unquote unlikable because they are tough and single-minded and pragmatic. Plus, they don't tolerate any nonsense from men. So when writing female characters, do you ever feel pressured by gender and culture stereotypes to make them likable or relatable for readers?
No. um, well, for a start, I honestly, I don't really write with the reader in mind most of the time, to be honest with you. I write with with myself being my primary audience. I like to, I write for me. And so I want to write whatever's on my heart the way I want to write it. But with the, with the caveat of, I also want to make sure I get these things right. And frankly, I want to write stories that I can hand to my sister and she'd be proud of, or I could have my mother read and she would be proud of, and to my wife and she would be proud of. I want them to be able to see themselves in my stories and themselves reflected well in my stories, and that's been a priority for me, and it's why I worry so much about my characters. Their journeys, their arcs, and their characterization, even down to their dialogue. I worry about all those different aspects for that reason. If we're about the business of reflecting the lives of people around us and the cultures around us, and we have to take that care and effort to make sure we take the appropriate steps to get that right.
Yeah. And, some female authors have talked about getting flack for not making a female character likable enough. So as a male author, do you encounter the same type of pushback?
I get pushback. Well, I don't know. I got all kinds of pushback. So pushback just kind of gets lost in the wash for me. I actually haven't, and honestly, it hasn't been my female characters that I usually get the pushback from, which I found interesting because even with Sophie Jefferson in Pin My Airship, she's quietly one of my favorite characters I've written. That Pin My Airship actually has a lot of my favorite characters I've ever written in that book, and I think part of it is, I think what makes her so authentic is that her journey is messy. She's a messy character and she does messy things. And that seems true to life for people, that, she's not there to get it right. She is pretty bullheaded and that's part of who she is. And I don't think, and I love the fact that she doesn't worry about being likable, because she's like, you know what? You all don't worry about being likable, so why should I have to worry about it? Why are you putting that on me that I have to be likable when you all definitely never worry about being likable? And I've always let her carry that close to her, because it's just and I guess you're right in terms of playing against societal expectations. I think that is fundamentally what her character represents in the book, is that intentional pushing back against societal expectations. Since it is a steampunk novel, and one of the big hallmarks of steampunk is love of Victorian ethos and culture and dress, and this was, and with Sophie, that was a great way to just push it back against that entire culture of expectation for women and women's roles.
So let's talk about writing men and masculinity in science fiction and fantasy. So do you think reframing how stories portray men away from hostile and poisonous stereotypes towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways science fiction and fantasy authors can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women? It's a long question. Yeah.
That's a long question. And I'm going to answer it in a different sort of way. So when I was growing up, there's probably more information you'll ever want to know, but I grew up, I was like the only black guy in my class for a lot of years. I went to the special education program, and they only allowed like 2 black people in, 1 black male, 1 black female, and it was an all white. Everyone else was white in the classroom setting, and I was therefore bullied a lot. And so for me, males in particular have never been a safe place. And I know that's kind of affected the way I approach writing males and the way I see males. And one of the reasons why I have so many females in my life or females, that was so awful sounding, why I have so many women in my life is because men have always been an unsafe place for me. And I'm wondering how much of that actually plays into my writing because of how I approach writing male characters, writing female characters, or writing women characters. And so I don't know where I was going with this answer. But I guess part of it is I seeing the men that I grew up with, both in the school setting and in the neighborhoods and things like that. That's a painful place to write from. And so I don't spend a lot of time in that brand of masculinity. And so one of the things I've already talked about how I want to write things that haven't been done or aren't seen nearly often enough. It's like, no, I want to write even my male characters. I want them to be different sort of characters. And so like when you see Desmond and Liz in Buffalo Soldier, that's essentially a found family relationship, a father figure and a son, and they're forming a found family. But I wanted to examine, the Black father figure in that story. That was one of the big things. And how can this Black male who's not biologically this kid's father, how can he model masculinity for this child? And I was very conscious about that, and even with that character worrying about things like that as they progress through the story. And so I don't know if that's a cure for things or a way to go, a better path for doing things, but I know that's the way I've gone about doing my writing. Is who are the men I would rather see out there, frankly.
Yeah, and one of the best father-son relationships that we've seen in pop culture is Captain Sisko and his son Jake in DS9.
I am so glad you said that. I am not in my office right now. I'm actually in my son's room, and thus I'm like, man, I'm probably appearing a bit more of a jock than I actually am, because this is not not what I do in my office. Now, in my office, however, there is a giant Captain Sisko action figure that's about yay big that hovers behind me at all times, and so I've really. That father-son relationship has really, and don't get me wrong, that probably was a subconscious model for me when I was writing Buffalo Soldier, because I think that was probably the best thing about, or one of the best things about Star Trek Deep Space Nine was that the centering of that relationship in particular, because that was something we hadn't seen before, and I love the fact that was the center, the core of that show.
Yeah. Well, you talked about being bullied in school by the boys and that men are not a safe space. And do you think that the violent and domineering, quote-unquote, alpha male character would eventually phase out of science fiction and fantasy? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that will stick around for much longer than expected?
I think it's probably going to stick around longer than any of us want, frankly. And I think that's because of the myth that our culture likes to tell about itself. And so that image of manhood and that image of masculinity, I was gonna say infects, and then I was like, no, infects sounds about right. Infects a lot of the storytelling that we see, and so it's going to take a while for new storytellers to sort of overrun that myth, that I would say almost a foundational myth of this culture when it comes to defining what manhood is. So maybe it won't stick around as long as I fear, but I'm hoping a generation or two out we'll have newer and better definitions of what it means to be a man.
Yeah. Oh, there is a question from the audience for you. There you go. So Misty 306, hi Misty. Misty is one of our regular viewers, and she has some great questions. She asks, you've written adult urban fantasy book. What was the writing process when you wrote The Usual Suspects, a realistic fiction novel for middle grade readers?
It was similar and completely different at the same time. When I set out to write The Usual Suspects, I was basically trying to write Walter Mosley for kids. I wanted to write something. I have two sons. Neither one of them are big readers, but I wanted to see if I could write something that could entertain the two of them. And so and so I set about trying to kind of chronicle. It was both chronicling the antics of my sons at that age and some of the adventures they got into, as well as wanting to entertain them. And so it was the same sort of thing, finding these characters, Thelonious and Nehemiah, these two young black boys who find themselves in the special ed room an awful lot. And then sort of falling in love with them as characters. And again, speaking of journeys, their journeys are messy because they are young boys, and young boys don't exactly have we'll say, clean ways of going through life. So their journeys are messy. And one of their main foils is a figure, M, who she tends to outwit them at every at every juncture. I love her so much. And so that was kind of my process, but starting off with these characters I love and chronicling these messy journeys, and like I said, I think it's in that messiness that makes the characters so real. I will say this: so Usual Suspects follows the lives of like I said, two young black boys. I just turned in my follow-up middle grade called Unfadable, and it follows a young teenage girl who becomes a neighborhood detective, and that was an entirely different challenge of writing. Of writing, period. Now I say it was a whole different challenge. But again, I have a lot of students who are glad to read the works in progress of Mr. Broaddus and give me far too frank feedback when I'm getting some of the characters wrong, we'll say.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but it's because I'm also a teacher. Yes, Misty, I am a teacher as well, and I'm not taking misogynist and all the tasks. That I teach boys as well, and I do not give them my work to read if I write stuff, because, like you said, there's entirely too much.
Right. Oh, I mean, I remember the first time I handed it to one of my students, and she was just like, "Mr. Broaddus, man, I like you, and I like this story, but there's an awful lot of boring parts in here." And I'm like, "Well, where are the boring parts?" And she would just like start marking huge X's through pages, like, "Nope, this is boring. I'm not interested." And I'm just like, "Oh, okay." And but you know what? I listened to her. And so I cut out all these boring parts, and she said, as long as you acknowledge, what'd she say? As long as I put her in the acknowledgments pages that I'm the person who made her book better, or that she's the person who made my book better, that is what she's charging me for that. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, Misty has a reaction. She says, she's laughing, and she says, "That's the best answer to a question of mine yet."
Well, thank you.
The kids are brutal, aren't they? They pull out punches when they tell the truth, and it's only when they get older that they learn to lie, and we have to teach them to be truthful, but also be tactful while you're being truthful, sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
So Misty's question actually is a great segue into the next topic that we're going to be talking about, which is stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. So, even to begin with, in ancient times, storytelling and verbal passing down of traditions and all, they are the ways. That's the main way in which cultures survive, because there wasn't any writing yet till much later. So, but now we can also use it for social change. And so let's talk about that. And so, in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about issues like violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
It's always in my writing. I think this is the biggest struggle for me, frankly, because there is that part of me that's like, I need you to understand the point that I'm trying to make. And so I do have to ease off that throttle in my writing. Well, I tell you what, so Pin My Airship is basically a meditation on that question, figuratively and literally, because at the time I was really struggling with that very question for me personally, because I personally believe in living my life missionally and with a great deal of intentionality and wanting to leave the world a better place for me having been in it. I mean, that's part of what I think is at the core of how I try to move through the world. But I was like, well, how do I, using my gifts to make the world a better place, but I'm just a writer. So what does that even mean? And so that actually becomes the question that my main character, or one of my main characters, Sleepy, wrestles with as his character's arc in Pimp My Airship. He is an open mic poet who knows he's a good poet, but it's when he encounters another figure, 120 Degrees of Knowledge Allah, who's like, no, we need your voice as a part of the movement, but why? And that's the question Sleepy keeps asking. Why my voice? What can I do? And one of the answers is, well, we just need your voice. We need your voice to keep calling out change, to keep speaking truth to power, to create stories of possibilities, to create, to give us room to dream together. We need that voice. And I'm saying that as part of the realization Sleepy came to, but it's also the realization that I came to for me personally, which is, part of my role as a writer, especially as I look at being an Afrofuturist, for example, is to dream of better possibilities, to dream of the world that I want to see, and not only dream of that world, but to dream that world into existence. And so it's one thing to just have that world, but there's another thing to then, all right, so if that's the world I want to see, how can I, in the presence, begin to manifest that world? And I think that is the ultimate power of stories, to, we create these possibilities for ourselves, and then those possibilities lead to roadmaps for how we can create better futures for ourselves.
Yeah. So moving from that, so the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books. Certainly in some subgenres of fantasy, like grimdark fantasy, violence against women, especially rape and sexual assault, is used to catalyze a male character's development, aka fridging, or as a shorthand for showing how terrible and brutal the world is. So do you think this is an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
Successfully? I would say no, overall. I mean, that's not something the short answer is no. Let me start there. And the only way I could really expand on this is like, that there are many ways to show the world as a dark place. But for me, using that, anything in that realm is just, I don't know. It's using a nuclear weapon to try and shape something. It's just, I don't even know how if I'm even shaping a good answer for this. I'll say this. Like I said, a lot of my friends are women, and we know the stats that women face. And so, I'm married to a survivor. I'm the brother of survivors. I'm the son of a survivor. So that's not a trope, a plot point, or anything that I play with lightly. or play with at all, frankly. And so when I see it, it's something that, I don't know, I just treat it very seriously. And if a writer's going to bring that up as a plot point, then they need to be very much on it. They can't just use it in some trite character development ways, because that's a quick way to pull me, not pull me out of the story, but to make me done with your story.
Yeah, and what's interesting, you might like to know, is that in the romance genre, they're actually making a lot more strides because they've had their feet held to the fire for a lot longer.
Right.
So even big names such as, did I get this right? Well, I'm not going to say whose names, but even big names in the genre acknowledge that they got a lot of things wrong. And if you read the body of their work from, what they wrote in, say, the 1980s, and right up until today, you can actually see the progression over the course of the decades of how they treat the issue of consent, the issue of rape, the issue of domestic violence, and they get it right. But that's only after being held by the feet to the fire, the whole genre, for the last decade or so.
Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think science fiction and fantasy has completed that feet to the fire thing. They're only just starting to hold the genre community to it.
Right. And so, I mean, a couple of things. So one, I hope that's true of all writers, myself included, is that you see over time that we're getting better, that we're handling these things better. Like I said, I probably could think back on some of my early writings and just cringe at how I wrote and handled different situations. But I hope over the body of my work that you see that no, I'm growing as a writer and growing as a person. And that being said, I'm glad to see these conversations happening in genre now. I would have loved to have seen these conversations even a decade ago, because that is how we get better. Being held accountable is how we get better. I mean, I know me personally, I've only, hopefully I've improved as a person. I'd like to believe I have, but that's only been through the process of being held accountable by people. If you don't have people in your lives holding you accountable, you won't improve. And so you have to question, if you have my real friends will hold me accountable, period. And so I would want people to hold me accountable in what I do and what I write, period. And that's how we grow. And like I said, I'm glad to see these conversations starting to happen in genre.
Yeah, and speaking as someone whose job it is to hold people accountable, it's not a fun job. It's not a fun thing and it gets tricky if it's a friend, right? Or it's a family member, and you're just saying to them, that wasn't right, take that back, because you shouldn't be, you shouldn't be saying sexist or misogynist stuff about women. Right. You shouldn't be treating people like that. You shouldn't be making those homophobic slurs. Right. You shouldn't be making those anti-Black slurs.
Right.
You shouldn't be making anti-Semitic remarks. And the most difficult thing to do is if you're holding your friend or your family member.
Oh yeah.
Go down.
Right, but that's the job. I mean, if we're going to be real in each other's lives, I mean that's the job.
And it's only in the last, I think, couple of years with Me Too that we see a lot of the predators in science fiction, fantasy, and even YA being outed. I mean, predators have lost jobs, not people. Predators have lost jobs and lost contracts over, them being, being misogynist and sexually harassing other people. But it's difficult, it's messy, and we need to do it.
Yeah.
It needs to be done in order for it to be a safe space. Which brings me to the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy. So, geek culture has had its share of critics saying that it is still too male-dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well-respected, and well-known female, non-binary, and genderqueer authors. And there is still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. So getting started on this because I'm rolling my eyes right now as someone who's been a geek since she was 11. So what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or conventions, more welcoming for women and girls?
So it's, I don't know. So recently I was asked here in town, there was an arts group. They were looking to open up an art space, and they wanted to target Black and brown artists. And there's a white lady who would approached us about this project, and she was saying, what can I do to make this a welcoming space? And I'm like, well, who's going to be the face of this space? And she's like, well, I am. And I'm like, so you as a white person is going to be the face of welcoming Black and brown people. What would it look like for you to move aside and allow a Black or brown person to be the face of this space, so that they can be the welcoming and create that welcoming environment? And I don't know if she was ready to have that conversation yet. And I think that's kind of the analogy that I think of moving forward into the geek circles, is that to create more welcoming spaces, we need those people who have historically not been welcomed to be the face of these spaces. We need more women in power, more women in these positions of these gatekeeping positions, these very much gatekeeping positions, because as long as the gatekeepers remain male, as long as the gatekeepers remain inhospitable, no matter what everybody else is trying to do, it's going to seep into the rest of that culture. So yeah, I guess it's not an easy answer, but it's, hey, you know what would it look like to turn over these spaces? And frankly, some of these spaces need to be turned over and frankly fumigated.
Fumigated.
Just saying.
Word. I mean, I'm just gonna share the experience I have now with geek spaces, that I'm part of several Facebook groups that get for urban fantasy and science fiction, and and there's always this one very vocal sub cohort, whatever we want to call it, who if anyone shares an article about here are 10 science fiction female writers that you should read for Women's History Month, and they'll start banging on about I don't see gender, blah blah blah, why do you share this? And then during Black History Month, we share 20 Black authors you should read. They start going, I don't see color and stuff. And then I'm not ashamed to say that one day I got fed up and I wrote a whole lecture in the comment section about structural racism and sexism, as to who are the gatekeepers, who's getting the marketing budget, whose voices are getting heard and getting paid. And that sparked off a huge brouhaha, kerfuffle, with me getting lectured, me as a woman of color getting lectured by white readers, white members of the group, including women, about how they don't, when they look at books, they don't see people's names, they don't see gender, they don't see color. And I just said to them, well, how can you not see gender and color when right on the cover is the author's name?
Yeah.
You can't claim you don't see gender and color unless you just buy books based on the title, but you can't escape the fact that the author's name is right there. So, but some people, for some people, the light bulb went on in their heads. Oh, they did not realize that what we get out here in the market, and what we get to read, is curated.
Yeah.
Is curated by gatekeepers who might consciously or subconsciously not include certain voices. So that's my little rant about, yeah, but I'm not ashamed to say I lost my temper and wrote the whole screen. And, and hopefully there'll be fewer of these really, these people going, I don't see gender and color, because, you can't say that, because you have to acknowledge, before things get better, you have to acknowledge things. You have to acknowledge sexism, you have to acknowledge violence against women, you have to acknowledge racism, you have to acknowledge the class war. But if you don't acknowledge that, that means you're privileged enough not to acknowledge that and just carry on with your life without ever thinking about it.
Well, yeah, and that reminds me of a time when I end up with these arguments with some editors of some pretty famous editors of anthologies, and to talk about how he has arranged the table of contents of his books, historically, and then which triggers his rant on, I don't see race, I don't see color, and I'll let him go for a bit, and I'm like, no, I can tell you don't see race or color, because you see exactly one race and one color. I mean, one race and one gender, because it's an all-white male table of contents. So yeah, of course you don't see race, outside of that. You never have had to, and you obviously don't, and it has formed your taste and your preferences, and it comes out in your work. And so, yes, you have the privilege to never have to see sexism or racism, because you were producing what you produce. So go with God, but I'll be over here doing my thing.
Yeah, and wasn't there one that came out this year that had to be withdrawn because it was a sword and sandals sort of thing, and anthology, and there was a huge uproar because every single author in that anthology was male and white and straight.
Yeah, I don't think there was just one time this year that has had to happen.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of thought to I am not going to make anything official yet, but I'm just going to say vaguely that when we're looking at stories and stuff like that, if you want to be inclusive, you have to be really mindful about who you're including.
Right. Well, the thing I told him is that one, I'm proactive. So I never have to, because he would talk about quotas and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I've never set a quota for any anthology I've edited. I don't have to. I have a very diverse group of friends. I have a very diverse Rolodex, and I have a naturally diverse contacts. And so, and I have an air about me that welcomes people of all stripes. So there is that. And then there's the fact that I'm proactive. So when I'm, doing my call for submissions, I'm not doing it in just the one channel that he is used to. I'm going to different communities specifically to welcome, specifically to invite. And then I don't have to worry about quotas, because I just know my slush pile is going to be naturally diverse. And so it boils down to intentionality and being proactive.
Yeah, and to some people that's a lot of work, but that's not really a lot of work if you.
It's not right.
You have to be serious about it. You have to be serious about inclusive of women, inclusive of people from all walks of life. And you talked earlier about tropes being lazy, being a lazy way of writing. If you don't make an effort, with putting together. When you put together an anthology or a panel, which we hear very often from authors, especially female authors, going, I got invited to a panel about, talking about women in fiction or whatever it is, and I'm the only woman on that panel, and everyone from the other panelists to the audience are shouting me down and are not heard. So what I'm going to say now, and Misty, who in the audience will probably agree with this, we have, the Pixel Project has, when we've started doing author panels. And when we mentioned this to Jim Hines, and Jim is a huge proponent of inclusivity, and he used to be a sexual assault counselor as well. And he's been with Read for Pixels, the Read for Pixels program for a long time, doing stuff with us. And we decided that any panel we host will always have 3 people. Well, if there are any men on the panel, there will only be 1 man. there'll be two women or one woman, one genderqueer, gender fluid person, and women minorities get to speak first. Men speak last, and it worked.
Mhm.
People get women. So far, we've had only women and female male authors, and we get feedback going. Feel so much more comfortable because you make sure that our voices are heard.
Right.
So it makes it so much easier. And you know what? These are great panels. They
Yeah.
talk about a lot of interesting things. And the men on the panels are sitting there and listening as well. When they speak, when it's their turn to speak, they make a lot of considered answers.
Right.
So it's being mindful about stuff like this. It works and it helps improve things a lot. So, but it is more work than falling back on what you know.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so anyway, so let's talk about parents and teachers. So
Okay.
you have two boys and you teach middle schoolers who are brutal when they read your manuscripts. So parents and teachers are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. As a father and a teacher yourself, what do you think parents and teachers can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations, and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's basically a twofold thing. One, it's raise better boys and empower young women. And that's basically been my the way I've gone about things. It's I try to instill and stay and I guess my method, if I had to boil down my method, especially with my two boys, has been how do I stay in conversation with them, and by that I mean what because they are 18 and 19, and like literally earlier tonight, one of my 18-year-old's friends was had asked my son to call me to see if he could come by and argue something about superheroes with me. And I was just like, you know what? That's great that I stay in my son's lives in such a way that his friends want to come over and be in conversation with me. Because as long as I can be in conversation with them, that's how I can have impact on their lives. And that's how I can continue to teach them and hopefully model better ways for all of us to move through the world. And then with the young women, it's like, hey, you know what? I'm trying, I don't even know how the best way to even talk about it. I can give you an example. There was one day when I came into my room at school, and a young lady was sitting behind my desk with her feet kicked up on my desk, which was a thing. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, Mr. Broaddus, I have to talk to you. Like, what about? And she's like, well, I feel like I should be in your next story. I'm like, why is that? And so she goes on about, how awesome she is as a character and how she would make a great character in my story. And I'm like, well, I tell you what, you write up a character bio of this of who you think you should be in my story, and I will put you in my story. And she does, and so she talks about how this character is beautiful and smart and funny and it should be a princess. And so, and this is a pretty thick bio that she writes. And then I'm like, you know what? She's actually put some consideration into this. I'm gonna honor this and put this into the story. And I wrote her up using her name and put her in the story. But I put a joke in there that I ran by her. I said, hey, I want you to see this, what I did with your bio. And there was a dialogue exchange between her character and a young man in the book and in the story. And he says to her, "You're so pretty. You're probably a princess." And she looks at him and goes, "A princess? Why would I dream so low?" And I wanted her to see that joke. Well, not even joke, but I wanted her to see that statement, because I don't want her to fall into traditional ideas of who she could be. I'm like, you can dream and you can be whoever you want to be. You don't have to fall into, you know, these you know, historical roles that push women into certain places. You can define your own space. And what does it look like to define your own space? And she was quite pleased. I'll say she was quite pleased with how she was portrayed in the story. I will say that. But I think that is part of what I see as my job as a teacher, as a parent, even as a mentor in the community. You know, my job is to empower young leaders, both young men and young women, and so whatever I can do to stand by them, and more importantly, uplift their voices. That is, I think, how we train up better leaders for the future.
Yeah, and more importantly, I think, just as important is that, you know, as a man, you are safe. You are a safe space for the kids, safe person for the kids to be around, a safe person to talk to, a safe person to be themselves with. And sadly, you know, many men aren't safe people for children and young people to be around with.
Right.
Yeah. A good role modeling too, because you're role modeling as you do it, and I'm betting some kid that you haven't even talked to probably watched you doing all that and decided that's the way I want to live my life, right?
Well, I mean, one of the things so one of the reasons I was hired at the school, frankly, when the principal found out I was interested in becoming a teacher, she was just like, "Do you know how rare Black male teachers are?" And Black male teachers make up, I think, I want to say somewhere between 1% and 3% of teachers, and students could go a big chunk of their educational career without encountering a Black male teacher. I know I didn't encounter my first Black male teacher until I was a sophomore in high school, and so the fact that the students get to see me in middle school, and very much I am the first Black male teacher. I'm one of the first Black male teachers they are encountering, because our staff has several. But you know, I'm very cognizant of that role modeling for them also.
Yeah. So we've come to a final question of the evening. Well, it's a two-part question. And the first one is Captain Obvious, but we've got to ask it. You have been so very incredibly supportive of our We for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So the first part of this question is, why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
Why do I? That does seem like a. I mean, why wouldn't I?
You'd be surprised, Maurice.
I know, I know, but that's the thought that terrifies me, is the fact that question should even have to be asked. Is like, why wouldn't I stand against violence towards women? I mean, that's again, I even if I don't know, that question in some way just fundamentally breaks my heart and hurts, that it would even have to be asked. We should just, as we breathe, we should stand against violence against women. I mean, we should stand against violence toward women. I mean, that should just be the very air we breathe, the very culture that we create should naturally just instill that. So.
Yeah, and it would be nice to have, you know, I often have jokingly say to people, you know, my job, the Pixel Project's job, is done when there's no more violence against women. That's when we can sort of pack up and turn out the lights and things. That's not going to happen for another, I don't know, beyond my lifetime, I don't think.
I'm hoping you go out of business soon.
This is the only positive stuff. You know, the only, if someone tells anyone else that they hope they go out of business soon, it's a big, horrible insult.
Right.
But for organizations and charities and nonprofits and agencies who work with on different aspects of violence against women, that's what we want to hear. I mean, that's what we want to see in our lifetimes. But sadly, I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime. Right. So, you know, like teachers like you, like middle school teachers and parents and coaches and all, you know, it's so important to get to the young people, to the kids, before they get to college, because that's when we can, the lessons about not being violent, not being misogynistic, not being sexist, those are the time, childhood and teenage years are the times when that message is going to sink in. So hopefully there'll be a young person out there watching a recording of this later on and thinking, oh, that's not the way. The way to be is not to be violent, and to think about the women, in my and girls in my life. So the final question is, what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Tell better stories. I mean, this is our stories drive our culture. Stories is how we see ourselves. Stories how we represent ourselves, and they're the stories. And stories is how we shape ourselves and shape our culture. And so, by telling better stories, by telling the stories of the world we want to see, that's how we improve things.
Yeah. So, final thing comment from Misty. Thank you for answering my question.
Oh, you're welcome. You're absolutely welcome.
Misty is awesome. She attends all our sessions, and she's frequently the one who asks really thought-provoking questions. So I'm going to put myself back on screen.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. If you joined us late, this is the disembodied voice that you hear talking to Maurice off stage. So before we wrap up for tonight, just to let you all know, if you were late and you missed the beginning, Maurice has generously donated a couple of wonderful goodies to the stash of treats that we have for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page, including the bundle of his latest books for one Read for Pixels donor in the US, and these are the books that we've been talking about throughout this hour or so. It's one paperback copy of Buffalo Soldier, one paperback edition of Pimp My Airship, one hardcover of Usual Suspects, and all the books are going to be signed and personalized by Maurice for you. So and also, just because one of our donors have brought this up, if you want to donate to us but have the books made out to a friend who's having a birthday, or a niece or nephew who's having a birthday, so just let us know. Just let us know. It's just a matter of making sure that we get the right names. And make sure that you're in the US, so Maurice can actually send it to you, because this is limited to US donors only. Now, if you are outside the US, if you're anywhere in the world, and you are a writer, and you need a fresh pair of eyes on your work in progress, or you are a beginner writer and you are getting stuck, Maurice has a second goodie, a second treat, which is he will critique 5,000 words on your work in progress. So that would be, you can submit the 5,000 words from either a novel, a novelette, a novella, or short story. Anything, just 5,000 words. Cap it at 5,000 words. And Maurice will also answer a round of 3 follow-up questions after he has sent you the critique, and you have read through it. And most people, after they've had the critique, usually have questions or any clarifications. Maurice is prepared to answer 3 questions in a single email. And you can and it's open to anywhere in the world. And just keep in mind that Maurice has a very packed schedule between his writing, teaching, and community organizing, which we were talking about for the past hour or so. So there's only just one of these treats available. One. And it would be perfect for anyone who is serious about honing their craft. Now, there are a ton more goodies, plenty more author goodies available from authors including Kat Ho, Melissa Caruso, Sarah Gailey, Callie Garrett, Matt Gardiner, Arjun Barker, Tamara Pierce, Alvin Hamilton, Marshall Ryan Maresca, and more. They're all up on our fundraising page, which, by the way, gets updated every Thursday, so that your son just kicked in, Maurice.
Yeah, that happens.
He can come say hi. It's fine. Anyway, so there are lots of goodies going up every week throughout September, but please, Maurice only has one of each of his goodies. Please donate generously. We've currently raised $1,090 towards our $5,000 goal, which is pretty darn slow. But given that COVID is happening right now, it's kind of to be expected. But we really hope to hit 5,000 so we can keep all our programs, including this one, running. So please give generously before the fundraiser ends on the 18th of October at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time, 18 October 2020. All funds go towards our work to end violence against women. And I'm going to share a little slide that we have. Maurice, can you see it?
Yes.
All right. So you can donate to get these goodies on Rally Up by going to bit.ly/R4P Rally Up 2020. It's case sensitive, guys. So y'all, it's case sensitive. So make sure to write it down exactly as it is, or you get sent to this page does not exist, which is not good. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, go to bit.ly/Read for Pixels. That's case sensitive again. And to find out more about violence against women, if you're new to this topic, even though you see around you and you don't know what to do about it, or you want to do something about it, go visit our website at www.thepixelproject.net. Now, Maurice, do you have any announcements you want to make? Anything that's coming up in the next 6 months?
Next 6 months should see the release of Unfadable, as a matter of fact. So my next middle grade novel will be out in the spring. So hopefully I will have listened to all of the teenage voices in my life, and there'll be no boring parts in it. And people should hopefully enjoy it. So.
And your second middle grade novel centers the female protagonist, right? Yeah. So that's gonna be correct. So everyone, if you're next week we'll have Alex Segura on Friday, 8:30 p.m. on Friday. Sebastian D. Cassell for all of you who like swashbuckling fantasy next Saturday. And we're having Samantha Shannon all the way from the UK next Sunday. And they'll all be talking about their fiction, women and girls in their stories and pop culture, and why we all need to stop violence against women. And now Maurice and I will bid you all good day or good night wherever you are in the world, and thank you all for coming for spending tonight or this morning with us.
Yep. Right. Thank